welcome to episode 1 of The Right Stuff, the story of my great-great-great-great-uncle, Lieutenant, later Captain Samuel Wright. I briefly covered off the early years of Samuel's career and his arrival in Australia and Van Diemen's Land in the prologue episode, so make sure you check that one out before diving into this one. Today we're in Strahan on the west coast of Tasmania, and when we left Samuel in the prologue, he was on his way here. Now there's so much information about Samuel's time here in this part of Van Diemen's Land, but I can make a whole series about this alone, because there's heaps and heaps of archival information, records of his official and private correspondence, and even third-party reports. But logistics get in the way. It's going to cost me about $400 for cruises on both of these cruise boats to give me an hour each day to film at the key location, because it's currently not possible to access the key location in a private vessel. So I'll do my best. And I want to give a shout out to my late father Tony Harrison, because most of the words for this video are taken directly from his incredibly detailed historical record of Captain Samuel Wright and his time in Australia. On the 4th of January 1824, Lieutenant Samuel Wright sailed through this ominously named passageway called Hell's Gates on his way to assume command of the penal settlement at Macquarie Harbour, located on Sarah Island. Accompanying Samuel were 2 sergeants, 4 corporals and 32 privates of the 3rd Regiment, the Buffs, which had been based in Georgetown in northern Tasmania. Samuel's appointment seems to have been rushed, because his accreditation as a Justice of the Peace required for him to act as magistrate in his Commandant's role had not come through until 2 weeks later after he arrived. Today we're on a far more comfortable vessel, but it's a fairly torrid day and fairly typical of the weather that you get here on the west coast of what was then Van Diemen's Land. The Macquarie Harbour penal station was situated on Sarah Island, some 15 nautical miles or a little over 27 kilometres from the entrance to the harbour at Hell's Gates. Sarah Island was a place for special punishment, a secondary prison for existing convicts who'd committed further offences in the colony. The Lieutenant Governor of Van Diemen's Land had described it to Colonial Secretary Lord Bathurst as, quote, "in every sense of the word, a place of the most severe punishment." Governor Arthur's later instruction to Samuel Wright said,
"You will consider that the constant active unremitting employment of every individual convict in very hard labour is the grand and main design of your settlement. Banishment to Macquarie Harbour, to be effective for the end to which it is intended, to deter from perpetration of crime, as well as to punish it, must be not only felt, but considered by the whole class of convicts a place of such strict discipline that they may absolutely dread the very idea of being sent there."
While the intention was that escape would be virtually impossible, the reality was that quite a large number of people did escape from not so much the island, but from the mainland where they were working, But the reality also was that with the nearest settlement being over 100 kilometres away through swamps, steep mountains and impenetrable bush, many of those people who did escape never got far. But there were some famous ones who did, most notably Alexander Pierce, the cannibal convict, and another one in the escape of which Samuel was directly involved. When Samuel arrived here at the Commandant's Wharf, he expected to be met by the man he was to succeed as Commandant, Lieutenant John Cuthbertson of the 48th Regiment. He was shocked to find that Cuthbertson had drowned and the post was precariously commanded by a corporal. A small schooner, the Governor Sorrel, was the first ship built at the settlement and was launched during December 1823, just prior to Samuel arriving. A gale blew up, and on the 23rd and 24th, the schooner dragged her anchor and drifted towards the mouth of the Gordon River. Cuthbertson ordered out his boat. He went to try and save the ship. They reached the ship, boarded her and got her safe and anchored again, and then headed back to Sarah Island in the dinghy. But in trying to get through the channel, the heavy seas upset the boat and all on board were thrown into the water. Two of the crew reached the shore, but Cuthbertson was drowned. The second in command of the settlement, Sergeant Waddy, was in Hobart on that day, and thus responsibility for the settlement fell to a corporal. And when Samuel arrived, he found
the settlement was in a very agitated state, the soldiers kept in constant alarm and terror from the prisoners threatening to rush on the barracks and carry it by coup de main.
The corporal's response to the situation was to proclaim military law and flog anyone who showed any signs of rebellion. Samuel doubted the prisoners seriously intended to take over and quickly restored order. His next task was to recover Cuthbertson's body. This was done on the 2nd of February, and the remains of Cuthbertson were placed in a leaden coffin, loaded onto the Waterloo and returned to Hobart, where he was buried in St David's Cemetery, now St David's Park. Until further instructions could arrive from Hobart, Samuel decided
that the primary object to be attended to in a penal station of this description is the safe custody of the prisoners and, next in importance, constant employment of their time, whereby convict labour should be rendered as advantageous as possible to the public.
His philosophy of maintaining security by ensuring there were no idle hands at Macquarie Harbour is often repeated in his dispatches to the Governor, but at times a shortage of transport meant that the timber felling had to cease. Samuel's role as magistrate for the settlement included the power to inflict solitary confinement for periods of up to 14 days, and up to 100 lashes, providing evidence had been taken and recorded. A quarterly return of punishment was to be sent to the Deputy Judge Advocate in Hobart. The direct supervision of prisoners was the responsibility of trusted convicts. And although such a system carried the likelihood for some of these honorary jailers might abuse their positions to settle some old scores, the lack of any paid civil servants left them with no real alternative. This was the same situation with most of the skills required to run the colony. Basically all tradesmen, blacksmiths, carpenters, you name it, were convicts or convicts on tickets of leave. Shortly after Samuel's arrival, a new doctor was posted to Sarah Island. Robert Garrett and his wife Charlotte resided here, next door to the Commandant's house. It was not long before tensions arose between Samuel and Dr. Garrett. Garrett apparently had an irascible temper and soon got on the wrong side of a number of other officials. Charlotte Garrett was not only young and beautiful, but apparently relatively wealthy. Charlotte was accompanied by another young woman whom Dr. Garrett later reported as being her sister. One source refers to them as a pair of twittering budgerigars, totally preoccupied with their own self-importance. Now, the Commandant's household included 2 soldier servants, Lance Corporal Bagshaw and Private Billet, and a convict gardener, William Sylvester. Now, while Samuel and the doctor are away visiting the new farm across the harbour, the soldiers induced the gardener with tobacco to parade naked through the doctor's yard, knowing that the young women were home with a female servant. Probably by arrangement, several of those previously upset by the doctor witnessed the parade. And although the women gave no sign of seeing Sylvester's streak through the garden, they reported the event on Garrett's return. Samuel held an inquiry, and evidence was given by Neil Douglas, the Commandant's clerk, and George Eldridge, the doctor's assistant. Both happened to be walking through the area when Sylvester was, as my father so politely writes, was engaged in the parade, i.e. streaking buck naked through the doctor's garden. The streaker received 50 lashes and was sent to the worst worksite, the rolling gang, for his troubles. But Dr. Garrett sensed a conspiracy and demanded that the soldiers also be charged. Samuel judged that this was not what his community needed and ignored the doctor's demands, and the relationship between the doctor and Samuel was only to deteriorate further. The superintendent was one Thomas Wharton, a former soldier who'd been convicted for embezzling regimental funds and transported to New South Wales. But he served only 15 months before getting a conditional pardon from Governor Macquarie in October 1821. Wharton had a born-to-rule attitude and believed that his 5 years as a convict were now forgotten and had never occurred. He felt he'd been restored to his position of officer and gentleman and should be treated as such by all, but particularly by those still under sentence. He complained that his one-room residence, right here, and that of Neil Douglas, the Commandant's clerk, who was still serving his sentence, were under the same roof. Wharton's irritation increased when Samuel stripped him of responsibility for timber production and gave that to Douglas. Wharton asked for permission to build a fence around his house so he was not forced to come into contact with the convicts, but Samuel refused. Samuel also had a tendency for rewarding the convicts who'd returned in the freezing cold rain with a tot of rum to warm them up. And Wharton knew that that was actually against regulations. And he wrote to the governor to complain. And the governor instructed Samuel under no circumstances was rum to be issued, which made Wharton not exactly the most popular person here on Sarah Island. Wharton's rivalry with Douglas brought things to a head. After a dispute at the sawpits, where Douglas was in charge, Wharton charged Douglas with insolence and being drunk. The charges were heard by Samuel as magistrate. Dr. Garrett was called for the defence. He swore that Douglas had been with him at 11 o'clock and showed no sign of having drunk any alcohol. Samuel, therefore, dismissed the complaint. Wharton was very upset by the result and continued to make accusations against Douglas. Wharton confronted Samuel here in the Commandant's office and alleged that Douglas was drunk and insolent on the 2nd of August and threatened to imprison another servant for going to Wharton's house, had slandered him by saying that he was a sodomite, and had caused others to conspire against him.
Had shown high contempt for your authority in browbeating and accusing evidence sworn before your worship, being a proper person to judge and try offenders, not your clerk, a prisoner of the crown.
Samuel turned on Wharton and told him that the last charge was an insult to him and he would send it to the governor. Samuel dismissed the superintendent and ordered him to board the brig immediately.
If the governor should send you back, I will resign. I will tell him you are a litigious character.
When he got to Hobart, Wharton took the issue all the way to the governor, but was ultimately unsuccessful as the governor backed Samuel.
Although your opening the letter from Macquarie Harbour might be neither felony nor insult, it was still in its conception highly improper. With regard to the office which you held at Macquarie Harbour, the Commandant at that post has reported that you are utterly unqualified to fill it.
In the first week of June 1824, Samuel and Dr. Garrett paid a visit to the new farm which had been established on Farm Cove, northeast of Sarah Island, where they were lucky to escape with their lives. Unbeknownst to the visitors, 15 convicts, including Matthew Brady, had seized the boat that had taken their tree felling gang to Kelly's Basin. After tying up the overseer, constables and all the other prisoners who were not in on the plot, they moved to the farm to ambush the Commandant. As he and Garrett were walking through the swamps, Samuel was aware that everything was too quiet and suspecting that something was wrong. He returned to the boat to order the crew to take her offshore for security. Before he reached her, he was seen by a number of prisoners who ran forward, threatening to kill him, but he reached the boat and pushed off. The prisoners followed in the boat they'd seized, but couldn't catch him, and so they returned to the shore. Dr. Garrett had been captured, but although they didn't harm him, he was badly shocked. Their stated intent was to kill the Commandant, take his boat, and escape to sea. Now, although Brady is the name most associated with this escapade, Samuel reported that the ringleaders were Crawford, Ryder and Thompson. Having failed to capture Samuel's boat, they hid in the bush for 2 days before the Commandant inadvertently gave them another chance. They succeeded in seizing another boat, which Sam had sent to recapture them. They then forced the crew to row it to here at Swan Basin and then carry it across the isthmus to the sea. Then they waited for nightfall, after which they slipped out past the heads. Dr. Garrett's temperament didn't change after the streaking incident. In fact, it got much worse.
My dear Cotton, I am most anxious to put you in possession of every circumstance connected with the complaint I have this day forwarded to the Lieutenant Governor against Mr. Garrett. Months ago this redoubtable man, he calls himself the Doctor, quarrelled with the detachment collectively and since almost individually. He has quarrelled with the storekeeper, his clerk, his own dispensers of medicine and has had nearly a score of trials on hand since his arrival, so that he has been kept pretty busy. For my own part I was resolved, if possible, not to quarrel with him. He saw my wish to avoid it, and in consequence of my great forbearance his presumption increased daily. I therefore considered it a wise plan to avoid all intimacy and, as Lady Lucretia Martel says, to withdraw the light of my countenance with him. This measure rather irritated than soothed the feelings of this pugnacious gentleman, and his little regular system of petty annoyances were pursued more rigorously.
One of Garrett's sources of irritation was the Commandant's dog, Pluto. Pluto's amorous intentions towards the Doctor's female dog were not appreciated. Garrett claimed,
"In the last 6 or 8 months of my residence at Macquarie Harbour I was very seriously annoyed by Mr. Wright's dog in consequence of his killing my poultry and swans. He was likewise constantly in my house, committing every species of nuisance, biting also almost everyone of my family. So great an annoyance as this, I represented to the Commandant, who did not have recourse to the slightest measure for its prevention, but on the contrary treated it with the greatest indifference, and on one occasion, heartily laughed at it. After remonstrating in the most respectful message to the Commandant by his servant, begging that he would have the goodness to keep the dog away from my house, that the annoyances occasioned had become quite intolerable. At this time he had bitten Mrs. Garrett's sister. This, like my other remonstrations, was treated with contempt, and the dog continued to be as troublesome as ever."
Garrett even wrote to Governor Arthur complaining about the dog, and sometime later Samuel writes that,
I heard Pluto howling piteously 5 minutes after I had an official from the doctor stating if my dog was not forthwith removed from his house he would be obliged to destroy him, as he considered him rabid. Well, though I knew old Pluto was at fault, yet it was not a capital sin. I thought he did not deserve death, and instantly sent my servant for him. You may imagine my indignation and astonishment on finding a deep wound on the inner part of his thigh, apparently from a knife.
Samuel locked poor Pluto up, but even this did not placate the Doctor, as their houses were so close together.
For the 3rd time the dog was then shut in the kennel, not at any remote part of the Commandant's yard, but at the very back of our bedroom, where the bellowing and howling of the animal were excessive, so much so as to prevent our rest during the whole of the nights that he was confined.
After a week in his kennel, Pluto was released on condition that should he still persist in skulking into the doctor's yard, Samuel's servant Billet would catch him and flog him there. Samuel was sure that a few days of that treatment should effectively deter Pluto from rambling. But matters came to a head on a hot summer afternoon on 29 January 1825. Dr. Garrett and his family had been leisurely dining since 2 o'clock, and Samuel was in his yard next door giving directions to some prisoners who were placing a tin vane on his chimney to direct this westerly wind away to stop the house from smoking up. It seems that Pluto had again evaded his confinement, and Wright ordered Garrett's convict servant to find him. Meanwhile, Billet found the dog and proceeded to follow orders and take him into Garrett's yard and cane him. On hearing the dog's howls, Garrett rushed out, obviously very much the worse for wine, and he seized the unhappy Pluto by the hind legs and flung him into Wright's yard. Then, in his anger, he caught Billet by the collar of his jacket and threatened to punch him. The soldier broke free, and Garrett prudently let go his hold. Turning suddenly on Wright,
He commenced hollering out in the most vulgar, offensive and abusive manner.
You are no gentleman. You, a gentleman. You are no gentleman.
And continued repeating these insulting and offensive expressions with every gesture of contempt.
Samuel placed Garrett under arrest, but Garrett continued to flout his authority, and Samuel later had to lay charges against Garrett and expelled him from the settlement. Like Wharton, Garrett took the issue further with the governor when he got to Hobart Town, and though it took some time, Garrett eventually received a reprimand for excessive drinking. Matthew Brady and his gang were at large for almost 3 years, famously taking over the whole town of Sorel and putting the garrison under lock and key. Governor Arthur offered a reward for Matthew Brady, and in return Matthew Brady offered a reward of 12 barrels of rum for Governor Arthur. This is Brady's lookout on the River Tamar, just north of Launceston. It was in this region here that Brady was eventually captured and hanged on the 4th of May 1826. In March 1825, Governor Brisbane in Sydney had advised Governor Arthur that he wished to regroup the 3rd Regiment, the Buffs, in Sydney in preparation for their transfer to India. He planned that a detachment of the 40th Regiment, under Lieutenant Colonel Balfour, would replace Lieutenant Colonel Cameron at Port Dalrymple, and the senior subaltern, Captain Butler, would replace Samuel at Macquarie Harbour. Butler and his men arrived on April 19, and Samuel left on the Waterloo 2 days later. Thanks to the very fine weather, Captain Kinghorn had the Waterloo in Hobart in only 5 days. And disembarking on 26 April, Samuel learnt of his long-sought promotion to captain. So that concludes our time here on Sarah Island in Macquarie Harbour, and we depart on the spirit of the wild 200 years, 7 months and 20 days after Samuel left. And we next join Samuel in Sydney for episode 2 of The Right Stuff. So if you've enjoyed this video, please click like, please subscribe, hit me up in the comments below, and yeah, we'll see you in Sydney for episode 2 of The Right Stuff. Thanks for watching.